migration really is a hot topic around the world, but it's really only 3% of the world are migrants. There's about 258 million people who are living outside of the countries of birth. The largest origin nations are India, Mexico, Russia, China, and the Philippines. The top destination countries are the United States, Saudi Arabia, Germany, United Kingdom, and United Arab Emirates. But since 2010, the fastest growth in immigrant populations, those leaving their country, have shifted actually to the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. So you can see here in this chart, you saw a big shift from in the 90s. You see a lot of out-migration from Latin America and the Caribbean. You saw something more of diversity in the mid-2000s, and then now you see a more bigger flow coming from North Africa, Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And this has a lot to do with the refugee surge that's going on there, but also many from Sub-Saharan Africa leaving. So let me turn to our attitudes towards the future and migrants. This is part of a annual survey that we do all around the world in 27 different countries. We survey, this is from 2018 survey, we surveyed about 27,000 interviews. This is the different countries we surveyed and what mode we use, whether it's face-to-face and telephone. This is kind of a snapshot. You'll notice we have a big missing China, but we haven't surveyed there in 3 years, but we're currently trying to work to survey there again. But these are the countries that represented in our global survey. So first off, I'd like to start off, this is a nice question that we like to ask. When children today in our country grow up, they will be either better off or worse off financially than their parents. This kind of gives us an idea of pessimism or optimism for the future. You notice here that Japan actually comes off as very pessimistic about the future. Even if they're doing very economically well right now, it's still very pessimistic. Well, as you could see, Indonesia and Philippines, and it kind of follows a lot of happiness indices. They tend to be more happy or better off, they believe, for their children in the future. So it's interesting to see how Japan is definitely more pessimistic than a lot of other nations. Then we asked this question about, do you think of immigrants today will make our country stronger because of their work and talents, or are immigrants today a burden to our country because they take jobs and social benefits? So across the board, it's quite majority believe that immigrants make their country stronger. But then if you notice here on the bottom, a lot of countries that have recently experienced a lot of the Syrian surge in Europe have more of a negative view or believe that's more of a burden, which makes sense given the amount of people who are going through their countries. And then we have this question about, do you want fewer, about the same, or less, or more immigrants coming into your country? And you can see across the board, I mean, the majority around the world want fewer immigration. It's just a fact. That's people don't want more. But you notice here in Japan, it's actually people are happy at 58% with about the same level. It's actually kind of higher than most other countries. So people are exactly happy with your current immigration flows. But then you can see other countries like the United States also, and Canada is actually quite happy with their certain level. But you can see Greece, Hungary, Italy, again, countries that experience a surge that really want fewer immigrants coming into the country. And here's just again Japan, which is about 58% should allow about the same amount of immigrants coming to this country. Then this is an interesting country and question that we asked, and Japan came out as an interesting outlier. We asked a question about immigrants in our country today want to adopt our customs and way of life, or immigrants today want to be distinct from our society. And now having visited here, it kind of makes more sense about why the Japanese results are so high. The Japanese public believes that 75% of their immigrants want to adopt our way of life. And this probably has a lot to do with because there's so little. There's so little, and there's a lot of restrictions and language requirements and who can actually come into Japan. That's why they believe, I think, why many of them do adopt the ways of life and the language and skills. But you can see that a large majority, it's actually quite mixed in how people think people are integrating into their societies. Then we asked a bunch of questions about crime as well as terrorism, just to get an indication if people think there's a correlation between immigrants and blaming for increase of crime. You notice here that, so the question is, immigrants in our country today are more to blame for crime than other groups, or are no more to blame for crime than other groups. You see, it's actually quite, half or more say immigrants are no more to blame for crime. But then again, you could see countries that have experienced a lot of surge, and it's probably capturing a lot of news media or coverage of connections between immigrant and crime. That's also the public opinion is capturing. And then here's our question on terrorism. You see that majorities in many European destinations believe that immigrants do increase the risk of terrorism. But you do have other countries that say do not, like Mexico, South Africa, here in Japan. They don't see that more immigration does immigrants increase terrorism in the country. Then this is a question about illegal immigration. We ask, thinking about immigration, would you support or oppose immigrants currently, deporting immigrants currently in a country living illegally? And quite the majority in most countries would like to deport. But you'll notice that the United States and some European countries are actually quite divided on this question. And when we split this by ideology between party identity, whether they're left or right, you see that those on the left are actually oppose deporting immigrants, whereas those on the right support. So it's actually quite polarized in the United States and many European nations, actually. And now I like to call this the Miss Universe question, but high-skilled immigration. We asked this question about, do you support, thinking about immigration, would you support or oppose encouraging highly skilled people to immigrate and work in your country? You see that the majorities around the world do are okay with high-skilled immigration, and you'll notice that especially here, when we took the sample of those who wanted fewer immigrants in their countries, you still see that those who want fewer immigrants are still okay with high-skilled immigration. So for policymakers, it seems to be this is not a big political or contested issue. And then here goes a question we like to get into, the brain drain. Question asking publics, do they think it's a problem or a big, very moderate or big problem for people leaving their country for jobs in other countries? You'll see across the board, many publics around the world believe that it's a problem. Exceptions are the United States, Canada, Australia. Big countries that actually receive immigrants have no problem people leaving. But you'll see here in the region, Philippines, India, here in Japan, Indonesia, and South Korea, a majority believe that this is a problem for people to leave for jobs abroad. And you can see even in Europe, people believe that it's a problem for people to leave their countries for jobs. So let me turn now to the trends that's going on. You always hear this in the news, probably in the U.S. as well around the world. But I'll give you kind of trends in the largest destination in the world, the United States, which has over 45 million immigrants. The United States is actually at a historic high in terms of its percentage of the U.S. population that is foreign-born. That's what we define as an immigrant. You can see it's about 14% right now. And this has largely due to 1965 Immigration National Act. That's kind of the main law that was adopted in the United States. That's our current immigration system. So before 1965, the U.S. didn't allow people from Asia or Latin America to immigrate into the United States. It was actually restrictive. It was only allowed for those coming from Europe. So you can see, but then this has been growing, and the Census Bureau has been projecting that the number of immigrants will be increasing from 45 million to about 78 million by 2065. And the percentage might be reaching about 18% in 2065. But you want to see the demographics have shifted over time in the U.S. You see in the early 1800s, there used to be a wave of northern West European immigrants coming to the U.S., followed by Southeast Europe and then Northwest Europe, a less percentage. But then most recently it's coming from this region as well as Latin America in this modern wave of immigration to the U.S. And here's a nice snapshot of the U.S. just to see. These are the top foreign-born immigrant group in each U.S. state. You can see makes sense around the border to Mexico, which is down here south from California to Texas, is Mexico is the top origin nation. But you can see in 1960 it was Germany, United Kingdom, Sweden, Italy, Canada that were top immigrant groups in the 1960s. But this shifted dramatically by 2013. So you can see here where Mexico is now the top origin. And this makes sense given why the border is such a political issue in the United States, because you did see the top immigrant group shift in many of these states all around the United States. But you can see here's just still some notable exceptions. India is the biggest immigrant group in New Jersey, right here. China as in New York, or I'm sorry, in Pennsylvania, followed by Dominican Republic up in New York, and other parts has more diversity kind of in the Northeast. But then Philippines is in Alaska. You see that's the top immigrant group, as well as Hawaii. And the Philippines has a lot to do, if you know labor migration, Philippines is the largest source of seafarers around the world. So they have a lot of fisheries located in Alaska. So a lot of Filipinos are now more currently working in the Philippines. In Alaska. So my group, my team at Pew Research Center, we do the annual estimate of unauthorized immigration in the United States. So this is our estimate. It has decreased even before President Trump took office, about 10.7 million unauthorized immigrants, which is a decline in the United States. But this is just a look at how in the U.S. it has dropped. And this really has dropped from Mexico in particular. So even though there's a lot of focus on the U.S.-Mexico border that you hear all the time, Mexico has dropped in terms of the number of illegal immigrants versus non-Mexicans. So really it's a flow of non-Mexicans coming through the U.S.-Mexico border now than those coming from Mexico. And also, you probably hear in the news a lot of families being separated. This is actually a new phenomenon where families are now coming in because of the Central America refugee issues, where a lot of people are seeking asylum in the United States. So a lot of family units traveling together are going through the U.S.-Mexico border. And you also had a phenomenon of unaccompanied children traveling by themselves, who are coming to seek asylum into the United States. So let me turn now to skilled migration. Again, this area that I said is the Miss Universe question people usually like, but this is also very important because for many nations around the world, people are also competing for the best and brightest. So you hear this all the time about skilled talent, especially with the tech economies all growing around the world. Well, when you look at comparing in other countries, the percentage of college degree holders of their immigrant populations, you see that Canada is actually on top, which is 65% of their immigrant population has a college degree or above, followed by Australia. And the United States actually is only 36% of its immigrants have a college degree or above. And this has a lot to do with how they select their immigrants into the country. Canada has a points-based system, which I'll talk more in other slides. U.S. has a more mixed, family-based sponsorship system where family members can sponsor their relatives who are abroad to come and immigrate to the United States.
Is that just legal immigrants or all immigrants?
This is all immigrants.
Okay, so that's another factor, I guess.
Yeah, so you could also be including the 10.7 million, yes, who are undocumented. But then when you look at, because the U.S. is just so large in terms of the immigrant population, the United States still has the largest number of college-educated immigrants around the world, at 14.7 million. But Canada is a far second, and then United Kingdom and going down the list. And here's where there's a lot of debate in countries about what type of selection system should you have for immigrants. So you see Canada adopted its points-based system in the 1970s, and this is, basically think of it as a college admissions. So you don't have to have an employer, but you have a college degree, you have certain skills, you have certain criteria that the government is looking for, you apply, you get a stamp, you get your permanent residency, you could live and work in Canada. U.S. is very different. It's a mixed system, whereas in France, they had a long history of labor migration coming from other parts of the world, especially in Europe. So they have less of that. But you can see how the points-based system really helped jump the college-educated immigrants coming into Canada. But in the United States, there's something. A lot of people, foreign students, come into the United States. U.S., I don't know how many of you probably studied in the United States, but U.S. is a big source of foreign students, the largest source of foreign students in the world. And this has a lot to do with a lot of its educational institutions that have historically been well known around the world. But we've recently have had an increase on foreign students, especially after the Great Recession. And this has a lot to do with a lot of universities in the U.S. that are publicly funded started slashing their funding for the public universities. So they were seeking foreign students as a new revenue stream. But you also had countries, especially like China, who had not enough placements or places for their students or citizens to go into their universities. So the United States kind of became a place for people to get educated who are foreigners around the world. You can see that public universities in particular from 2008 to 2016, this is a graph of new incoming full-time foreign students, has grown exponentially from more than doubled from 101,000 to 209,000 new foreign students coming into public universities. And you can see private universities also grew, but it was really public universities grew a lot during this period. And this is kind of looking at it by degree program. So you can see that bachelor's degree grew the most at public universities by 150% over this period. And that's a lot to do with Chinese students coming into the U.S. to study for a bachelor's degree. But then you could also see master's degrees at private universities grew by 108%, and public universities about 106% growth. So there's a lot of, it's a bachelor's and master's story of foreign students coming in. Doctorate students who are foreign students only grew slightly, and then you did see a doubling of associate's degree. This is pre-bachelor's, but it's still such a small portion of all foreign students. This is a graphic of the countries of citizenship. So you can see China by far have the most foreign students studying in the United States, followed by India, South Korea, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has an interesting program by the late King Abdullah. They've just removed this program, but it was a scholarship program that was sending a lot of Saudi Arabian students to the United States. But you can also see Vietnam, Taiwan, and Nepal also has a lot of foreign students coming in and studying in the U.S. And then after you graduate, in the U.S. has a very liberal policy on accepting, allowing foreign students to stay and work. So if you graduate from a U.S. university, 3 months before your graduation, you could apply to your International Student Office and say, I want to work under what's called the Optional Practical Training Program, OPT. And that allows you to stay 1 year or currently 36 months if you have a science, technology, engineering, and math in the United States. So this is work authorization for full-time work. Very easy. There's no cap. But if you just choose to take this, it's usually pretty simple. These are the foreign students who are choosing to stay and work under this program. You can see, you saw the last graph, China's the most foreign students, but here it's actually India has the largest percentage of its foreign students staying and working in the United States. You have about 30% of all OPTs. But you have nearly 3/4 of the 1.5 million graduates on OPT from 2004 to 2016 came from Asia, from this region. So you can see mostly from India, China, South Korea, and Japan and Taiwan, and also Nepal. What's driving this? So STEM foreign graduates. So the United States, of course, there's been a lot of talk about Silicon Valley, a lot of the need for STEM workers in the United States, and some people discuss and say that there's a shortage. Well, the United States hasn't reformed its immigration policies. So in 2008, you see a line there. Before 2008, foreign students were only allowed to stay under OPT program for 1 year, whether you're a STEM degree or not. It was just only a 1 year program. And it was really meant as an extension of your degree program. But then George W. Bush at that time, he didn't succeed in reforming the immigration system, which would have increased the number of high-skilled immigrants. So instead, he used administrative power or changes in administration to extend OPT to 29 months. And then in 2016, President Obama also didn't succeed in reforming the immigration system, so he also extended the STEM program to 36 months, which is its current rate, and also expanded the definition of what is STEM. So like actuaries and economics are now considered STEM. But you saw this growth because of this policy change done in 2008. You saw over a 400% increase on the number of STEM foreign graduates choosing to stay and work in the United States under this OPT program. And you can see non-STEM is quite less. So there's more incentives, people are staying and working who are STEM foreign graduates. And here's just like a snapshot of the foreign graduates who are under OPT. You can see 78% of those with PhDs have a STEM degree, followed by masters. About the majority also have a STEM degree. But the future is unclear. So this is, I'm waiting for 2018 data that I requested from the US government. But you can see here that, I'm not sure if this is a peak, but between 2016 and 2017, when President Trump took office, you did see an increase, but you did see a 27 percentage point growth rate drop. So usually during the last OPT extension in 2008, you did see this increase. We increased, but the growth rate slowed down. So we would probably have expected a greater growth, especially with an expansion of the number of months that STEM degree holders can stay and work in the U.S. But it's uncertain whether or not there is a slowdown. But you can see there's a slowdown by countries. A little bit of this is the percentage point decreases by country of citizenship of those who are choosing to stay and work in the U.S. But what's interesting here is Nepal, which saw an increase of foreign students too in the U.S. You saw an increase of those from Nepalese staying and working in the United States. But you saw India, Colombia, Malaysia, even Japanese having a large 17 percentage point drop of foreign students choosing to stay and work in the U.S. under this OPT program. So if you want to stay longer in the U.S., so think of it as a funnel system. You have foreign students. If you got admitted to the United States, you could come in. If you haven't graduated from U.S. university, you could come in. You could stay and work for 1 year or 36 months. But then if you want to stay more permanent, there's a temporary worker program called the H-1B visa. That's the largest temporary worker program in the United States. And we also have other temporary worker programs like H-2A, H-2B. Those are more for agricultural workers and other seasonal workers. But H-1B is the largest way that foreign students and high-skilled workers can come in the United States. And the United States, it's a first-come, first-serve system where employers apply for who they're hiring every year. So the beginning of this month in April, an employer would have to submit a paper application to the U.S. government during the first week. And if the number of applications exceed the number of H-1Bs available for private companies, which is capped at 85,000, and this 85,000 is 20,000 are set aside for graduates of U.S. universities with a master's or doctorate. But everyone else is, and then there's 65 for everyone else. It has exceeded, especially since the economic recovery in the United States. So you can see here there are more applications than the cap, the H-1B visa cap line. And what they do after the first week, if there's more applications than supply, they do a lottery. So the current system is now doing a lottery system after the first week. This past month, you also had the same trend where you had more applications than available. So now you have more OPTs, more foreign students choosing to stay and work under the OPT program than the available H-1B visa that are given every year. And here's a snapshot of our green card system. This is for permanent residency in the United States. The United States allows about 1 million foreigners to become permanent residents every year. And you can see here the composition of how to come in the United States permanently. So 65% are mostly family sponsored. These are sponsoring your relatives. It could be sponsoring your brother who's abroad or your mother or parents. You also have refugees, which is a 14%, and H-1Bs would fall under employment-based immigrants. So it's only a small portion of the larger immigration system. We also have a diversity visa program, which is set about 50,000 every year. This is to countries that have low immigration into the United States. So many sub-Saharan African countries are allowed to apply for this. So it's really doesn't matter if you have a job, education, skill. It's just a matter of applying for free. So just to give you an indicator of how popular this is, in Ghana, about 10% of the population applies for this every year. It's huge. So the chances are really slim. Actually, this morning I just met someone who was Japanese. There was a time when Japan was able to apply, but she applied a long time ago in the 90s, and she had one. So she got a green card. So it gives you a green card to live permanently in the United States. And it's all based on how many immigrants come to the United States from your country of origin. But the system also is unique in the U.S. because no one country can have more than 7% of green cards in any given year. So you saw India, China, these are just big countries. And you also saw they're the most popular countries for foreign students coming to work in the United States. But for them, if they get sponsored by their H-1B employer, they have to wait 10 plus years for their green card. Because, again, if you're from India and China, big countries, longer wait time. But if you're lucky and you're coming from Luxembourg, it'll probably just take about a month. So that's just how the American immigration system is currently working, and this is how the green cards are currently distributed. So let me now, as I'm closing, just turn to attitudes towards other types of migrants, towards refugees, and also people's intentions to migrate. So in our global attitude survey, we also ask, do you support, talking about immigration, would you support or oppose taking in refugees from countries where people are fleeing violence and war? And you see the actual majority, even countries that have had experience with a lot of the refugee crisis, people still, at least the way we pose this question, do support accepting refugees. But then you can see also here in Japan, down there, 66% of majority do, even though I know you have a very, very, very small refugee population here in Japan. But then globally, this is based on UNHCR data, our analysis of UNHCR data, you see that the number of refugees being resettled has decreased, especially since 2017. So you can see there's been a number of refugees worldwide has increased by a lot, by 2.75 million between 2016 and 2017. But the numbers that are being resettled has decreased dramatically. And this has a lot to do with the United States under the new administration, which has decided not to resettle a lot of refugees. So you did see, historically, the United States has been a leader in resettling refugees. And this is the U.S. compared to the rest of the world. But now the rest of the world is resettling more refugees than the United States. So now, intentions to migrate. We asked this question about, do you plan to move to another country sometime in the next 5 years? We didn't get to ask this question to all countries, but we asked this set of countries. You see Nigeria, 45% of its public is planning to move to another country sometime in the next 5 years. You also see this in Tunisia and Kenya. So this also aligns with a lot of other surveys that we know, like Gallup does their survey, and they ask the same question, where a lot of people from sub-Saharan Africa are also intending to migrate in the near future. But in the region, Philippines, which makes sense given their labor export policy that they have, they manage out-migration. You see 15% of the population is planning to move in 5 years. And also you see South Korea, about 6%, India, and Indonesia, about 2%. But then we also ask the subset in Africa, how serious are they to actually move in the next 5 years? So we think there's like 3 criteria. So have they gathered the information about moving to another country? Have they applied to the necessary documents such as a passport or visa? And have they saved or borrowed money to actually make that move? And we actually fall all 3 criteria. Tunisia actually comes up high in terms of 28% taking all of these 3 preparation steps to actually move abroad. So this is a question that we only asked in a few countries, but we're thinking of asking more of these questions as we move forward in our global surveys. So I would like to end there.